Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for coming. This is exciting. This is super exciting. It's my second Supercon, and the first one I'm speaking at, so thank you so much. What I'll walk you through today is actually five big things. One, I just want to know how many of you are pilots, how many of you are hackers, and how many of you are both, because there are so many parallels between those two lines. Then, for those of you who are not pilots, I'll tell you how to become pilots, because you should become pilots. Then, once you were pilots, or maybe you're just hackers, you want to build an aircraft. Why not build one? Like, seriously. It's such a pleasure to be able to do so. Then I'll switch to the other side, kind of for the other side of FAR, when I talk about where hackers and pilots clash, and how to unclash it. Drones, amateur modeling, it's all accessing the shared national airspace, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And then I'll close up with some takeaways and pointers for you to actually get on and join the aviation world. So, raise your hands if you're actually paying attention. Awesome, so food coma did not set in, great. So many of you are hackers. Do you belong to a hackerspace? Have you joined one yet? No space, perfect. How many of you have been featured on a Hacker Day? How many of you participated? Perfect. Well, I've done some of the above. I joined the hackerspaces. I've broken the news on Raspberry Pi PCI Express, so I guess I've done something on the hacker side, but I would not call myself a hacker until one of you calls me hackers. So that's sort of the question. How many of you are pilots? What do you fly? Commercial? Yeah, all right. Private or commercial? I'm a commercial rating instructor, but I used to do it for fun. Awesome. All right. Any drone pilots? Any drone pilots with 105, 107 ratings? Well, you should get a 107. It's super easy, and you have an instructor who can just do it. It literally is that simple. Pass a knowledge test and do it. I'm a private pilot. I don't have a commercial rating. I'm working my instruments, but I've been involved in building things for the aviation world. So, why you're here? Kind of the things I wanted you to be able to take away from it. Do you want to become pilots? And why should you? What do you want to innovate? Do you want to innovate in a space that is actually so welcoming? There is a renaissance of general aviation. Why am I here? For similar reasons. I was actually right there at the busiest control tower. Do you know where it is? Bingo. Perfect. I was there actually exactly when the call for papers happened for Supercon. And I looked around and said, gosh, this looks like hackers community, except nobody knows about a hackers community here. And then I went back to my hackerspace, and there are not that many pilots. So let's change this. Just kind of because it's recorded and it gets on the internet. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not anything that is regulated. If you want one of those, find them. I'm not representing FAA, I'm not representing any association. They have great news and great articles online, just read them. But contact me after the talk or send me an email and I'll send you pointers. Any questions? All right, so how does one actually become a pilot? Well, you start with a student pilot, and this is literally a form. And you get yourself through it. As if you are a foreigner, you might have to get some fingerprints done, but broadly, you're able to fly with an instructor same day. You're able to get a joyride, you're able to learn. In fact, you're able to fly with a non-instructor same day, because a pilot in command doesn't have to hold the controls at any point in flight by rules. They are still responsible for the entire safety of flight. They have to be in position to be able to do that. But you can actually teach your friends as a private pilot. You just cannot say that you're teaching your friends as a private pilot. Well, that gets you to a private pilot. Probably the most fun transition, because you can take your friends up in the air. You can play with various types of aircraft. You can actually get that Part 107 super easily and fly drones whenever you like. When you're not a private pilot, you need to pass a knowledge test. When you are a private pilot, you click through some forms on the FAA website, basically. There is a small test, but it's like 7 questions and basically means, do you know the difference between a drone and a bigger airplane? Most people will go to commercial, which allows you to charge for flights, which allows you to perform certain types of duties, teaching, instructing, crop dusting, doing cargo, all sorts of things. And most people do it for a while until they get enough hours to get into the airline industry and then make the big bucks and they retire early. And then they go back to being private pilots and fly for fun. So that's your typical cycle. So how does one get there? Well, this is kind of the official process. You pass the knowledge test, so you prove that you know your stuff. And it's a multiple choice computerized question. You click through it, you answer the questions after you've learned it, and you get a report. If you passed, great. If you failed, it's actually really hard to fail. It's 70% pass-fail threshold, so it's really hard to fail, but if you don't get good grades on it, you will be quizzed on that during the oral test. And you'll be expected to cover those deficiencies during the instruction. Which brings you to the oral part, which you sit in front of the FAA examiner who flies in, typically in their own plane, to your airport to examine your knowledge. And they go for the same thing. That's in the knowledge test. After you've passed the oral and the knowledge, and you've made enough hours flying with your instructor, and instructor endorses you, and all of the other sub-points of the FAA's rulebook, you get to do the check ride or the practical test or whatever names of it. That is possibly the first time you're exercising your rights to carry passengers. Your examiner has the ability to take over from you and will do so if the flight is unsafe, but you are expected to perform the entire flight by the book. From pre-flight to safety briefing to actual flying, doing maneuvers, everything until you land, and he shakes your hand and gives you your certificate. And you don't even have to wait for anyone to reprint it for you or anything. It's ready that night. You can actually just say goodbye to your instructor, bring your wife over, and you can go again. A lot of people have done that way. How does it actually work in practice? Like, why would you do that? Well, you need to bring like 3 things officially for things on the plane. The plane needs to be verified. There are lots of steps that you learn how to do it, and then you go up in the air. But in practice, it's actually a lot more fun. You need to find a plane. You can either own it or you can rent it. Like with anything else in the world, you either own it or you rent it. Then you need to figure out where you're going, verify that you can do it safely. Do you have all of the paperwork? Do you have all of the currencies? Does the plane have everything? And then you just go. You verify everything else with the tower, communicate, pre-flight, safety brief, all of the little steps. But fundamentally, I can be in the air within about 25 to 45 minutes from when I want to be in the air. There is not that much more to do. So, why not do it? Why would you do it? Well, for one, because it's a good challenge. It's there. Why do you fly? Why do you climb Everest? Why do you hack? It's a good challenge. It's a technical challenge. It's a great community. You are surrounded by people who love flying, who will teach you. Flying is a license to learn, and hacking is a license to learn. So we should just fly. It's a career choice. Some people will go to the airline world and do it that way. A lot of us would also do it so that we understand the manufacturing world in the United States, which is predominantly aerospace and medical. And of course, you can do it for business and pleasure. Even as a private pilot, you are allowed to do personal business with that certificate. And you can just get places by plane a lot faster than by anything else. Literally this morning, I was talking with someone about, well, it'll be like 9 hours to get to the national park from where I live, or 3 hours by plane. So maybe it'll be 3 hours by plane. Yeah, it'll be 3 hours by plane. That's so good, because I could do it commercially, but it'll still be 9 hours. 1 hour to the airport, 2 hours commercial, and then another 5 hours to the national park anyways. Doesn't help. But where is the innovation in this world? Well, for that we need to unpack this complicated term, experimental amateur build. And as with anything in FAA, it's just called EAB because nobody wants to spell it out. And it boils down to how you make something airworthy from the legal perspective. There is the standard way, and yes, just like in the Fallout universe, there's a special way. And the standard way is kind of what you get in the standard certificate. Normal transport utility, if you're an airliner, if you're owning a Cessna, you'll have one of those. On a special side, you have limited, which is basically standard with limitations, and you have all of the extras, light sport, special flight permits, where you have a partially fixed up aircraft that you want to carry from one place to another. You might get a one-time permission to fly if it's just barely airworthy to fly, but not really good to carry passengers or doing anything else. That happens fairly often in renovations. And then this big bucket, experimental. First, it was kind of established for research, training, and marketing purposes. How do you know your aircraft will sell if you cannot demonstrate it? Experimental. How do you know it'll fly if you haven't demonstrated it? Experimental. There's also the exhibition racing category. That's where warbirds live. That's where aircraft that you just want to show off live, that will have restricted operating privileges, as well as racing aircraft. People race them for fun. There was actually a great race in Reno. They are moving somewhere, who knows where to. Amateur build. That's where real fun happens, in my opinion. Because you're permitted to build an aircraft by yourself. An FAA will certificate that aircraft for your usage with almost no restrictions compared to a commercial aircraft. And this is probably the most misunderstood element of EAB. Because people assume, well, you can't do that. It's impossible. It's actually easier, in my opinion, to get experimental aircraft certified than your own dune buggy in California. That's how easy that is. And of course, there are unmanned aircraft systems, things that FAA has no idea how to regulate, so they try to dump it in experimental, succeed at it, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of companies have spun around this. So how do you do experimental? Well, you first need to decide that you want to do it, right? You don't just go and do it. You can choose from plans or kits. Plans are just what you think they are. Blueprints, you pay a few $100 for them, and you just go on and do it from steel, canvas, wood, balsa, whatever. Or kits, when somebody has done the boring part. They cut out the ribs of the wing. They cut out the spar for you. You're putting it together. The FAA rule is not very different from the firearm rule of 80% receivers, except it's 51%. So you need to build at least 51% of the job. And FAA will verify with kit manufacturers that their kit has not done more than 49% of the work. So you're doing the rest. Once you actually decide what you want to do, you go and build it. And similar to hackerspaces, you can do it, of course, in your own place. I don't have a hangar yet. You can do it in a rented hangar. You can do it on an EAA chapter, which is an organization dedicated to amateur built aircraft. Similarly, you can do your laser cutting or 3D printing in your local hackerspace. It's about the same thing. You can, of course, do it at a kit manufacturer's workshop, where they will actually lease you access to their facilities so you can come in and do your 51% work under their supervision and their advice, which is super cool if you have the money to do that. And while you do it, of course, you get some interim inspections from typically the FAA's engineering representative, who comes in and verifies that you've welded it right, that you've riveted it right, etc. Once it's ready-ish, you go and register it. You actually can register a lot earlier. I've seen people register aircraft that don't exist because the FAA doesn't actually care if it exists until it gets inspected. Registration is just claiming a number broadly, and it's not effective until it's actually inspected. So you can register a lot earlier, and then you get it inspected, and you get your special certificate. For the first 40 hours, it's a test certificate. You have to do the test flights. And that's exactly how the manufacturers do their aircraft. They also get 40 hours of test requirements for Boeing 737, whatever. That is about the same, except in your case, You're certifying just one, which means it's a lot easier because you're not proving to the FAA that you can build 500 of them well. You're just demonstrating to the FAA that you've built that one well, which is a smooth process. After 40 hours, you have the ability to carry passengers. If you build your aircraft with avionics that allow for instrument flight, it's instrument rated. If you've built your multi-engine experimental aircraft, you are a multi-engine aircraft owner. There are almost no restrictions on insuring it. There are almost no restrictions on selling them afterwards. And there are tens of thousands of these things built and flying in the airspace right now. So why would you do that part? Well, now you can answer that part much more easily. It's also a challenge. You're just building something you've never built before. Go and do it. You're building something that's safe, complicated, and you're learning a lot of technical skills. I become a much better user of composites since I helped build a couple of aircraft. I've become a much better user of riveting tools, wire snips, and a few other things that are transferable from the aviation world to the rest of the manufacturing world. It's a community. That's the big draw for me. That's why we went to Oshkosh, probably. There are so many people building aircraft, talking about building aircraft, talking about designing aircraft. You know the guy who won the X Prize for the Spaceship One launch vehicle? That's the company by Burt Rutan, Scaled Composites. They have designed for 25 years before doing that spacecraft all sorts of kit planes that you can still buy. In fact, they are still making them, and in fact, this is the aircraft I'm planning to build. You have the right to repair and modify that aircraft, because as part of certification, you get a repairman certificate for it. If you bought a Cessna, there's some preventative maintenance you're allowed to do. You can change spark plugs and maybe change the battery, but with EAB, you can actually fix the thing you built, which kind of makes sense. You build it, they trust you that you know what you're doing. And it's innovative. You can test things with almost no restrictions because of your repairman certificate on your aircraft that you wouldn't be able to test on a normal certificate. On a normal certificate, you do something as simple as clamp down a GoPro on a strut outside of the wing, and depending on how much FAA dislikes you this day, it might be inappropriate. There's actually back and forth on whether it is or it isn't, because you're making a permanent modification before flight to something that the manufacturer did not approve. You do it to your own EAB aircraft, you've approved it. This means that you can test things that then go into the normal aircraft. Engine temperature sensors. People who put in car engines in order to get better fuel efficiency, more preventable and predictable combustion processes, started in experimental and light sport, moved to normal. You can test avionics, vibrations, lidar. People do things like angle of attack sensors, which are not present yet in normal category. You can install them in experimental amateur build. In my opinion, and statistics are different depending on where and which year, experimental amateur build can be, for certain subset, safer than normal. And for other subset, people will screw up and they won't be. But actually, there is not much difference other than it's more bimodal in experimental. This presentation wouldn't be complete without a slide on something that I don't have much information on, which is FAA Mosaic, and that's because they have not finalized the final rules on it. But FAA is modernizing some of these rules, and from what I can tell, making it easier for light sport aircraft and for experimental aircraft. So you'll have even more privileges, because FAA has a mission to make it safe, and they cannot make it safe without making it accessible and innovative. So, Mosaic. Pay attention to it if you want to dive into it before the next talk or the next time I see you and you ask me questions. And here comes to the third part, which is kind of where we clash. Hackers and aviators, which is the unmanned aircraft systems and drones. And you get some articles on Hackaday that somebody flew a drone where they're not supposed to, and somebody gets pissed. And there's the vice versa of it, where the rules have changed, and now the drone people are pissed that the rules have changed, and they cannot fly as much. This happens a lot, but most of it happens because we don't actually understand the rules, which are not horrible. Could be easier for in some places, but actually they're far more permissive if you want to do bigger things than you would ever expect them to be. But let's start from the small side. If you're flying recreationally and you fly something light, you can go to your Fry's or Micro Center, pick something up under 250 grams. Everybody thinks there are no restrictions on it. There are almost no restrictions on it, but since this year there is something called Trust, recreational UAS safety test by the FAA. You do need to pass that in order to fly legitimately. I don't think there's much compliance with this rule, but you have to pass it in. Becomes important if you do something problematic, because that's a bigger stick that somebody will try to hit you with that if you didn't do that. If you go to bigger drones, bigger Mavics, 6 copters, whatever, you need to register them with FAA. It's a web form. It's not a big deal. And they will need something called remote ID, which means they will broadcast their location to the tower so that tower can actively deconflict the other users of the airspace from you. Other than the registration and remote ID, which some of us are afraid of doing from privacy reasons, it's still a very easy process. Where the challenge gets interesting is the commercial use. And a lot of people are skirting that rule on recreational and hoping they don't get caught, and usually they don't get caught, which is if you do it for any commercial purpose and FAA is broad in defining it, you should have a Part 107 rating. Commercial use can be as boring as I want to inspect the roof of a house before I'm buying it. It technically is commercial. And some people will try to do it on recreational privileges. Don't recommend it. It is what it is. However, the nice thing about this test is not difficult. It's some legwork, and then you can start charging for use of drones. Then you can start doing it for money. Then you can start modernizing, selling things around the drone industry. And this could be your gateway to even bigger things. So let's talk about why you might want to do it. Special Certificate Experimental Unmanned Aircraft System. What if you're big? I was working at a company that actually built 2 big aircraft, both of them over 55 pounds. Well, no big deal. It's an experimental aircraft. You register it, you certify it, go. You have better access to airspace if you're under these set of rules, because then your remote pilot coordinates just like the onboard pilot would, and FAA is okay with this. That's how Amazon can fly their huge delivery drones. That's why firefighters can fly their drones, even though they have special rules to accept them. Commercial, large blimps, radio repeaters, surveillance drones, all sorts of things you can build under these privileges. And the formula is about the same as it used to be for the experimental EAB. You design it, you might get some review because FAA is slightly more interesting about it. You build, register, test, and operate, just like you would fly your normal plane, except you're on the ground. So, how do you get ship done? Well, how do you become a pilot? Get a joyride. Go to the nearest instructor, he might be behind you, and ask for a joyride. Most local flight schools, most instructors will actually do it for a small fee, and you will have the opportunity to actually be in a small aircraft and be in control, not in command, but in physical control over that aircraft during the joyride. It's the most exhilarating part ever. If you're under 18, or if you know somebody who's under 18 and wants to do it, there's the wonderful program called EAA Young Eagles. Pilots volunteer to fly teens and children to get them excited about it, because that's one of the best gateways to STEM education, so we do it. You get some ground school. There are plenty of options online. My favorite, I'm slightly biased, is the MIT Private Ground School. We do it every year in Boston, but we also have all of the videos online. And it's a lot of fun, and you probably will enjoy it. You pass the knowledge test, and off you go. You have your, at least, knowledge test out of the way, which means you can go, actually you can go to the flight school earlier. Nobody stops you from getting your first practical lessons while you're still doing your knowledge test, but you can go and be a solo pilot. A requirement for a solo flight is your instructor's endorsement, so you've done enough you received enough instruction that he or she will trust you to fly on your own, but you need to pass your knowledge test beforehand. You find your flight school, you pay typically by the hour of instruction, and you get yourself through the either bare minimum that FAA mandates, which is 45 hours. 75 hours is national average last time I checked. Kind of my flight school's average was about 64. I managed to do it at 68, so it's somewhere in between those two numbers typically. You learn everything else you might want to learn in your practice, and you probably will discover why you want to fly afterwards. Is it for fun? Is it for commuting? Is it backcountry flying? That will allow you to shape your conversation with your instructor of what you want to learn extra. In my case, I actually got my high performance endorsement because I wanted to fly aircraft that is more suited for commuting. So actually, right after my check ride, we just went for 3 hours of cross country and got it because he was comfortable that I can do it. How do you become a home builder? Well, go to Oshkosh, because they'll tell you a lot better and a lot more for 7 days about it than I can ever tell you in 40 minutes. It is the largest celebration of aviation in the US. About 300,000 people show up every year to do it. And you'd learn and join the chapter. Then you'll find a chapter, same way as you would find a hackerspace around you. You'll join it. There are pretty much about 4 to 6 in every state I checked. So they're all over the place. You'll find what people are building and you start helping them. That's probably the best way for you to learn what the skills you want to do on your own aircraft. You find workshops and available trainings. You learn stuff you never thought you would learn. You might start innovating at that point. I already started thinking about a couple of projects and products while I was helping people out with theirs. And then you go back to that slide of buy or build, get your aircraft, start flying. So, I hope I excited you about airplanes. Go hack them. Hack yours. Don't hack other people's airplanes. They might not be happy about it. It might be illegal. Get involved. And with that, I can open the floor for questions. Thank you so much.